The camera opens on an ordinary street. Cars passing, people checking their phones, clocks ticking forward without resistance. Time appears obedient, predictable, almost boring. Yet scattered across history are stories that challenge this comfort. Accounts from individuals who claim to slip through time's rigid structure and return with details they could not have known. These stories exist in police reports, declassified documents, personal journals, and recorded interviews, often dismissed as fantasy, yet stubbornly resistant to simple explanation. One of the earliest modern cases comes from a man found wandering the streets of New York in the late 1800s, dressed in outdated clothing, visibly confused by electric lights and automobiles. When questioned, he provided an address that no longer existed and produced coins that were genuine, but minted decades earlier and in pristine condition. Before authorities could investigate further, the man vanished from custody, leaving behind only records and unanswered questions that still sit in historical archives. Decades later, in the middle of the Second World War, a pilot on a routine mission reported flying through an unusual cloud formation. His instruments failed, the sky darkened, and when he emerged, he saw unfamiliar aircraft designs parked below him. Moments later, everything snapped back. After landing, he described planes that would not officially exist for years, designs later confirmed in post-war military developments. In another case, a woman in the 1970s claimed she repeatedly experienced sudden time slips while walking through her hometown. Streets would transform, storefronts would change names, and people would dress in styles from the early 1900s. She began documenting these moments in detail. Years later, historians verified that her descriptions matched precise, historical layouts that had never been publicly documented, including interior details of buildings demolished long before she was born. A chilling story emerged from a hospital in the early 2000s when an unidentified patient was admitted after a traffic accident. He carried identification from a country that no longer existed, stamped with dates from the 1950s. Medical staff reported that he spoke about future events as memories rather than predictions. Before authorities could determine his identity, he disappeared overnight, leaving behind only a medical chart that raised more questions than it answered. In rural France, a group of teachers hiking near an old estate reported suddenly finding themselves surrounded by an atmosphere that felt heavy and unreal. They described seeing people in period clothing in buildings that later research confirmed had been destroyed centuries earlier. When they exited the area, only minutes had passed, but their emotional reactions and independent, matching descriptions suggested something far more complex than imagination. Another account surfaced from a Soviet-era scientist involved in experimental physics. According to declassified testimony, an experiment involving high-energy electromagnetic fields resulted in a brief visual projection of a future cityscape. The scientist described architecture and technology not yet developed at the time. Years later, photographs of modern city centers bore unsettling similarities to his sketches, down to structural layouts he insisted he had never seen before. In the late 1990s, a stock market anomaly caught the attention of financial regulators. A trader made a series of impossibly accurate investments over a short period, predicting market crashes and rebounds with precision. When questioned, he claimed to have lived through those events already. Before charges could be filed, the man withdrew all funds and disappeared. His trades remain one of the most statistically improbable sequences ever recorded. One of the most debated stories involves a photograph taken in the early 1940s at the reopening of a bridge. Among the crowd appears a man wearing modern sunglasses, a graphic t-shirt, and holding a compact camera far ahead of its time. Experts confirmed the photo's authenticity and could not explain the presence of objects that should not have existed. The man's identity was never established, and no evidence of manipulation was found. A deeply personal account comes from a child who vanished in the woods and was found days later, unharmed but profoundly changed. The child spoke of spending years in another time, learning customs and language from people long dead. Medical examinations showed no signs of aging, yet the psychological maturity suggested lived experience beyond the missing days. As the child grew older, the memories faded, leaving behind fragments that still trouble researchers. Perhaps the most unsettling story comes from classified military logs describing a naval experiment that allegedly caused a ship to vanish briefly from radar and visual range. Crew members later reported disorientation, missing time, and vivid memories of places that did not align with known geography. Official explanations cited equipment malfunction, yet multiple independent testimonies describe the same impossible details. Each of these stories stands alone, fragile and incomplete, yet together they form a pattern that challenges the idea of time as a simple forward march. Scientists propose theories of space-time distortions, parallel timelines, and consciousness-based perception shifts. Skeptics argue coincidence, hoaxes, or psychological phenomena. Still, certain details refuse to fade, verified facts embedded within otherwise unbelievable narratives. Time, as measured by clocks and calendars, may be a convenient illusion, a surface-level agreement that hides deeper mechanics. If even one of these accounts contains truth, then the past is not locked away, and the future is not entirely unwritten. Somewhere between recorded history and theoretical physics, these stories linger, waiting, suspended in the quiet spaces where certainty breaks down, and the ordinary flow of moments no longer feels quite so absolute. Time has long been treated as a straight road, stretching from a fixed past toward an unknown future, marked neatly by seconds, hours, and years. Civilizations were built around this assumption. Calendars, histories, deadlines, and lifetimes all rely on the belief that time moves forward and never loops back. Yet the stories examined throughout this documentary quietly challenge that foundation, suggesting that time may not be a single direction at all, but a complex structure that can bend, overlap, or momentarily collapse. Across different eras and cultures, people with no connection to one another have described remarkably similar experiences. They speak of moments when the present suddenly dissolves, replaced by another time that feels just as solid and real. These experiences are not described as dreams. They involve physical surroundings, emotional reactions, and lasting memories. In many cases, the individuals involved had no prior interest in time travel, no expectation of encountering anything unusual, and no apparent reason to fabricate such claims. Physics itself has already weakened the idea of time as absolute. Einstein demonstrated that time slows down under extreme speed and gravity, meaning it is not fixed but elastic. Modern theories suggest that past, present, and future may exist simultaneously, forming what some physicists describe as a block universe. In this model, time does not flow. Instead, consciousness moves through it. If this is true, then what we experience as now is simply one slice of a much larger structure. The stories presented hint at brief moments when that structure becomes accessible. A man steps into a city that no longer exists. A pilot sees aircraft from a future war. A child returns with memories of years that passed elsewhere. These are not tales of machines tearing through time, but of ordinary people encountering fractures in reality. The consistency of these reports suggests that time may be less like a river and more like a landscape, where certain paths can cross under rare conditions. One striking pattern is the absence of control. None of these individuals see when or where they traveled. The shifts were sudden, disorienting, and often terrifying. This randomness implies that time travel, if it occurs, is not a mastered technology but a natural phenomenon, triggered by factors we do not yet understand. Environmental conditions, electromagnetic fields, psychological states, or unknown cosmic variables may play a role. Another unsettling detail is how seamlessly these experiences integrate with reality. People report physical interaction with their surroundings, coherent conversations, and detailed observations. In some cases, they return with information that is later verified. Streets align with forgotten maps. Technology matches designs still years away. These elements suggest that if time is non-linear, then accessing another point in time is not stepping into a simulation, but into the same universe observed from a different temporal position. Memory also plays a critical role. Those who experience time displacement often retain vivid recollections, even when years pass. These memories do not behave like imagined events. They carry emotional weight, sensory detail, and psychological impact. In some cases, individuals struggle to reintegrate into their original timeline, haunted by a sense of displacement, as though they no longer fully belong to the present. Skeptics argue that stress, neurological conditions, or false memory can explain such phenomena. While these explanations may account for isolated incidents, they struggle to explain patterns across unrelated individuals, cultures, and decades. They also fail to address cases involving physical evidence, verified documentation, or multiple witnesses experiencing the same anomaly simultaneously. If time is non-linear, then the concept of cause and effect becomes unstable. Events in the future could influence the past. Information could travel backward without intention. This idea challenges not only science, but philosophy, free will, and identity. If all moments exist at once, then choice becomes a matter of perspective rather than sequence. Technology may already be brushing against these boundaries without fully realizing it. High-energy experiments, particle accelerators, and electromagnetic research occasionally produce anomalies that defy expectation. Most are dismissed as errors or statistical noise. But history shows that revolutionary discoveries often begin as unexplained irregularities. The discomfort surrounding these stories may stem from what they imply. A non-linear timeline means the future is not entirely open and the past is not completely fixed. It suggests that reality is far more interconnected than daily experience allows us to perceive. It also implies that human understanding of time may be limited not by intelligence, but by perception. Throughout history, concepts once considered impossible were later accepted as fundamental truths. The Earth was once thought to be the center of the universe. Time was once believed to be the same everywhere. Each shift in understanding required abandoning deeply held assumptions. The idea that time does not move in a straight line may be the next such shift, resisted not because of lack of evidence, but because of the profound implications it carries. If time can bend, overlap, or momentarily open, then the stories of time travelers are not necessarily violations of natural law, but glimpses of a law not yet fully understood. They may represent rare intersections within a vast temporal structure, moments when the boundaries between then and now briefly dissolve, allowing a human consciousness to slip through and return changed, carrying fragments of a reality where time does not obey the rules we thought were unbreakable. What makes these accounts truly unsettling is not their drama, but their consistency. They emerge from different centuries, continents, and social backgrounds, yet they carry strikingly similar elements that defy coincidence. People who never met, who lived decades apart, and who had no access to one another's stories describe experiences that align in structure, sensation, and outcome. This repetition suggests something more than imagination at work, something persistent moving beneath the surface of recorded history. In many cases, the individuals involved had no reason to invent elaborate stories. Some were ordinary workers, others professionals whose reputations suffered after speaking out. Their accounts were often offered reluctantly, sometimes years after the experience, when the burden of silence became heavier than the fear of disbelief. This reluctance adds weight to their testimony, as fabrication typically seeks attention, while these stories often brought ridicule or isolation. The most compelling aspect lies in the details. These are not vague impressions or symbolic visions. Witnesses describe specific clothing styles, architectural features, dialects, technologies, and social behaviors. When such details are later cross-referenced with historical records, they often align with precision. Street layout. Match forgotten maps. Building interiors correspond to archives unavailable to the public. Even minor details, such as signage or local customs, reflect accuracy that would be difficult to fake without extensive research. Research many of these individuals were demonstrably incapable of conducting. One recurring element is the sense of physical reality. These experiences are not described as dreamlike or blurred. People report solid ground beneath their feet, temperature changes, ambient sounds, and emotional interaction with others. Some report touching objects, smelling smoke or food, and feeling wind or rain. The sensory completeness challenges explanations based solely on hallucination or imagination, which rarely produce such coherent, multi-sensory experiences shared across cases. In a number of incidents, multiple witnesses independently reported the same event. Groups of people walking together described entering environments that abruptly shifted in time, later comparing notes and discovering their observations matched. They described the same buildings, the same clothing, the same strange atmosphere. Shared hallucination on this scale is extremely rare and remains poorly understood, yet these cases persist in historical records. Even more difficult to dismiss are the instances involving physical evidence. Authentic artifacts appear where they should not exist, coins from another era in perfect condition, photographs containing objects from the future, documents referencing nations that no longer exist. Experts often confirm the authenticity of these items while remaining unable to explain their presence. The evidence does not prove time travel, but it resists alternative explanations with stubborn resilience. Some individuals return with knowledge that cannot be easily accounted for. They speak of events that have not yet occurred, using language that frames these events as memories rather than predictions. In some cases, these events later unfold with disturbing accuracy. While coincidence is always possible, the frequency and precision of such occurrences strains statistical probability. Psychological explanations often fail to address the uniformity of these accounts. While the human mind is capable of extraordinary experiences under stress or trauma, such explanations do not explain why people across cultures and time periods report similar structures to their experiences. Nor do they explain why these experiences often leave individuals fundamentally changed, exhibiting long-term emotional and cognitive effects consistent with lived reality rather than imagined events. Cultural contamination is another common argument, yet many of these stories predate popular time travel fiction. Some were recorded in eras when the concept of time travel did not exist in public imagination. This removes the possibility that individuals were subconsciously borrowing narrative frameworks from literature or media. The stories emerge organically, shaped not by expectation but by experience. There is also a notable absence of spectacle. These accounts rarely involve grand missions or dramatic alterations of history. Instead, they describe confusion, fear, and a struggle to understand what is happening. The travelers are observers rather than actors, reinforcing the impression that they did not step into a fantasy shaped by desire, but into an environment governed by its own indifferent reality. The repetition of these patterns forces a deeper question. When independent stories align in detail, structure, and consequence, they demand consideration, even if they challenge established understanding. History has shown that patterns dismissed as coincidence often become the foundation of new knowledge once the right framework emerges to interpret them. If these stories were isolated, they could be ignored, but their persistence across time suggests an underlying mechanism yet to be identified. Whether that mechanism is physical, psychological, or something entirely unknown, the consistency of these accounts implies that something real is being experienced, even if its nature remains elusive. The discomfort lies not in accepting the stories, but in confronting what they imply. A universe where such experiences are possible is one where reality is more flexible than assumed, where time may fracture or overlap under certain conditions. The shared details across independent accounts serve as echoes of a deeper structure, hinting that these are not random anomalies, but brief exposures to a system operating beyond ordinary perception. What elevates these stories beyond speculation is the presence of tangible evidence, elements that anchor them to the physical world and resist easy dismissal. In several cases, what remains after the experience is not just memory or testimony, but objects, records, and data that can be examined, tested, and verified. These remnants do not conclusively prove time travel, yet they introduce a level of complexity that pure imagination cannot easily explain. Throughout history, authors have documented encounters with individuals carrying items that did not belong to their time. Coins minted decades earlier, yet showing no signs of circulation, identification documents from defunct nations, and clothing made with materials or techniques inconsistent with their alleged era have all been recorded. Experts often verify the authenticity of these items while remaining unable to explain how they came into possession of the individual involved. Photographic evidence presents one of the most unsettling challenges. In several historic images, objects or technologies appear that should not have existed at the time the photograph was taken. Cameras far more advanced than their era, clothing styles not yet introduced, and accessories manufactured decades later appear frozen within otherwise ordinary scenes. When these photographs are examined, specialists confirm that they show no signs of manipulation, forcing observers to confront the possibility that the anomaly lies not in the image, but in reality itself. Medical records add another layer of difficulty. Hospitals have reported patients whose documentation does not align with any existing registry, bearing blood markers, vaccinations, or surgical techniques inconsistent with the period in which they were admitted. In some cases, patients speak languages or dialects long extinct, using terminology accurate to a specific historical moment. These records exist within official systems, resistant to erasure, even when the individual later disappears without explanation. Financial data has also played a role. Transactions recorded in banking systems reveal patterns of knowledge that defy probability. Individua, LS with no prior expertise, suddenly execute trades with uncanny precision, predicting market shifts that later occur exactly as described. While insider trading is often suspected, investigations sometimes reveal no access to privileged information, leaving analysts with sequences of success that fall outside normal statistical models. Military and government archives, when declassified, occasionally reveal logs and reports that were once buried under layers of secrecy. These documents describe anomalies encountered during tests, missions, or surveillance operations. Equipment malfunctions are often cited as explanations, yet the consistency of witness statements and the detail of recorded observations suggest something more than technical failure. Radar blips that vanish and reappear, vessels briefly unaccounted for, and personnel reporting missing timeform patterns that remain unresolved. Even more compelling is the verification of information obtained during these experiences. Some individuals return with knowledge of historical details unknown at the time, later confirmed by archaeological discovery or archival research. Others describe future technologies with accuracy that only becomes apparent years later. These confirmations do not occur in isolation. They emerge gradually, as independent researchers stumble upon data that aligns with long-dismissed accounts. Skeptics often argue that evidence can be forged or misinterpreted, and in some cases, this is undoubtedly true. History is filled with hoaxes designed to exploit belief. However, the challenge lies in explaining why some evidence withstands rigorous scrutiny, why experts cannot find signs of fabrication, and why these anomalies appear in official records rather than personal anecdotes alone. Physical evidence also carries psychological weight. Those who handle these artifacts or analyze these documents often report discomfort, not because of what the items are, but because of what they imply. An authentic object in the wrong time destabilizes the assumption that history is sealed and linear. It suggests permeability, the possibility that moments bleed into one another under certain conditions. The persistence of such evidence across decades indicates institutional unease. Rather than being celebrated or explored openly, many of these cases are quietly archived, classified, or dismissed with vague explanations. This pattern mirrors historical responses to discoveries that threatened established frameworks, where uncertainty was managed through suppression rather than investigation. What remains is a collection of fragments, each insufficient on its own, yet collectively forming a troubling mosaic. Coins without a clear origin, photographs without explanation, records without owners. They sit at the intersection of fact and mystery, resisting categorization, Science relies on repeatability, yet rare phenomena have always challenged that standard, from meteorites once dismissed as myth to rogue waves once denied by oceanography. If time travel were a natural but rare phenomenon, its evidence would appear exactly as it does here, scattered, inconsistent, and difficult to reproduce. It would leave traces without providing instructions. These physical remnants may not be proof in the strictest sense, but they are signals, indications that the structure of time may allow exceptions under conditions not yet understood. The refusal to fully engage with such evidence may stem from fear of its implications. Accepting it would require revising foundational beliefs about causality, history, and human limitation. Yet ignoring it does not make it disappear. The artifacts remain, quietly challenging certainty, waiting for a framework capable of explaining why they exist where they should note. At the center of many of these experiences lies a question that is far more unsettling than machines or physics: the role of human consciousness. Again and again, accounts of time displacement point not to technology, but to perception, awareness, and internal states. People do not describe pressing buttons or entering devices. They describe moments of disorientation, heightened awareness, emotional intensity, or sudden silence, as though the mind itself crossed a threshold the body simply followed. In several cases, the shift appears to occur during altered states of consciousness. Individuals report being lost in thought, overwhelmed by emotion, exhausted, or deeply focused when the environment around them changed. These are moments when the mind loosens its grip on ordinary reality. Neuroscience shows that perception is not a passive process. The brain actively constructs the world we experience. If that construction can shift, even slightly, the reality perceived may also shift in ways we do not yet understand. Some researchers propose that consciousness may not be confined to the present moment. Memory already allows the mind to revisit the past, while imagination projects it into the future. These are internal experiences, yet they feel vivid and emotional. Lie real. The question raised by time travel accounts is whether, under rare conditions, consciousness can extend beyond imagination and memory, interfacing with other moments in time as directly as it interfaces with the present. This idea is not entirely foreign to science. Quantum physics has already challenged classical notions of observation, showing that the act of measurement can influence outcome. If observation plays a role at the most fundamental levels of reality, it raises the possibility that consciousness is not merely a byproduct of physical processes, but an active participant. In this view, time may not be something consciousness moves through, but something it helps define. The emotional after-effects reported by time travelers are significant. Many describe a lingering sense of detachment, as though part of them remains elsewhere. Some struggle with depression or anxiety, not from fear but from a profound sense of dislocation. These reactions resemble those of individuals who have lived through intense, life-altering experiences rather than imagined events. The psychological impact suggests authenticity in the experience, regardless of how it is interpreted. Children who report time displacement present particularly compelling cases. Their descriptions are often simple, unfiltered, and lacking narrative structure, yet they contain details later verified by adults. Children have less cultural conditioning and fewer preconceived notions, making them less likely to construct elaborate fantasies. When such reports emerge spontaneously and persist over time, they challenge assumptions about imagination and suggest that consciousness itself may be more flexible than assumed. There is also a recurring theme of awareness rather than action. Those who experience time shifts rarely attempt to change events. They observe, absorb, and endure until the experience ends. This passivity aligns with the idea that consciousness is tuning into another temporal state rather than physically traveling in the conventional sense. It suggests that the body remains anchored while awareness temporarily disengages from the present. Meditative traditions across cultures have long claimed that time is an illusion, a construct of the mind. Practitioners speak of states where past and future dissolve, leaving only a timeless present. While these claims were historically dismissed as metaphorical, modern neuroscience has begun to document altered temporal perception during deep meditation. Time travel accounts may represent an extreme involuntary version of such states. Another intriguing pattern is the difficulty people have in articulating their experiences. Language, shaped by linear time, struggles to describe events that do not conform to sequence. People often pause, correct themselves, or use metaphors, not because they are lying, but because they lack vocabulary for what occurred. This linguistic struggle mirrors the difficulty scientists face when attempting to describe quantum phenomena using classical language. If consciousness plays a role in time displacement, it may explain why such events are rare and unpredictable. Consciousness is influenced by countless variables: emotional state, neurological condition, environmental stimuli, and perhaps factors not yet identified. A precise alignment of these variables could momentarily alter our perception enough to access another temporal layer. This perspective also reframes the debate about evidence. If time travel is mediated through consciousness, then physical traces may be inconsistent or incomplete. Some experiences may leave no artifacts, only memory. Others may briefly interact with physical reality strongly enough to leave evidence behind. This variability mirrors the inconsistency seen across reported cases. The idea that consciousness can traverse time challenges deeply held beliefs about identity and selfhood. If awareness is not bound to a single moment, then the self is not fixed in time either. It becomes a moving point of experience within a vast temporal structure. This concept unsettles because it undermines the assumption that the present moment is the only place we can truly exist. Rather than asking how a machine might break the laws of time, these stories invite a different question: whether the laws themselves are incomplete without consciousness as a fundamental component. Time travel, in this light, is not a technological anomaly, but a perceptual one, revealing that reality may be far more intertwined with awareness than previously imagined. Despite decades of scientific progress, these accounts expose a boundary where modern understanding falters. Physics has delivered extraordinary insights into the nature of reality, yet when confronted with experiences that involve time behaving unpredictably, existing models begin to strain. The gap between what is observed and what can be explained reveals not failure, but limitation, a reminder that science is a process rather than a finished structure. Current theories describe time through equations and measurements, yet they rely on conditions that are controlled, repeatable, and observable. Time travel stories exist outside these constraints. They are spontaneous, rare, and often impossible to recreate. Science traditionally advances through replication, but history shows that phenomena once dismissed due to rarity were later accepted once technology or theory caught up. Early astronomers could not explain meteorites because stones falling from the sky did not fit existing models. For centuries, reports were dismissed as superstition. Only when chemical analysis advanced did meteorites become undeniable. Rogue waves were once considered sailor myths until satellites finally captured them. Time-related anomalies may belong to the same category of misunderstood phenomena, awaiting the right tools and perspectives. Theoretical physics has already opened doors that would have seemed impossible a century ago. Concepts such as space-time curvature, wormholes, and time dilation are now mathematically valid, even experimentally supported in limited ways. Yet these theories often exist in abstraction, far removed from human-scale experience. Time travel accounts challenge scientists to bridge the gap between cosmic models and personal reality. One obstacle is measurement. Instruments are designed to track time as a consistent flow. If time behaves differently under certain conditions, current tools may be incapable of detecting those variations. An anomaly that lasts seconds or occurs within consciousness rather than space may leave little for instruments to record. This creates a blind spot where genuine phenomena can go unnoticed or be dismissed as error. Anat. Her challenge is interdisciplinary resistance. Time travel does not belong neatly to a single field. It touches physics, psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy. Academic structures often discourage such overlap, slowing progress. Experiences that fall between disciplines risk being claimed by none, analyzed incompletely, or ignored entirely. There is also the issue of paradigm protection. Established theories form the foundation of careers, institutions, and technologies. Radical ideas that threaten these foundations face higher scrutiny, sometimes bordering on rejection by default. This is not due to malice, but caution. Yet caution can become stagnation when anomalies are consistently sidelined rather than explored. Many scientists acknowledge privately that current models of time are incomplete. Publicly, however, the lack of a testable framework limits discussion. Without a mechanism, experiences remain anecdotal, regardless of their number or consistency. This creates a paradox where evidence accumulates without a theoretical home, existing in a state of scientific limbo. Technology may eventually provide that home. Advances in quantum computing, brain imaging, and high-energy experimentation could reveal patterns previously invisible. Correlations between neurological states and temporal perception may emerge. Subtle space-time fluctuations might become measurable. What appears impossible today may become mundane tomorrow. The danger lies in assuming completeness too early. History repeatedly shows that certainty is temporary. Each generation inherits knowledge that feels definitive, only to watch it revised. Declaring time travel impossible based on current understanding risks repeating this pattern. It confuses the limits of present knowledge with the limits of reality itself. There is also a human cost to dismissal. Witnesses who report anomalous experiences are often marginalized, labeled delusional or deceptive. This discourages reporting and skews available data. A phenomenon cannot be studied if those who encounter it are silenced. A more open yet critical approach would preserve scientific rigor without sacrificing curiosity. Ultimately, these stories do not demand belief, they demand humility. They remind us that science is not a closed book, but an evolving conversation with the unknown. Time, perhaps the most familiar and least understood aspect of existence, may still hold structures and behaviors beyond current comprehension. If understanding time requires new mathematics, new instruments, or new ways of thinking, then these accounts may represent early signals rather than final answers. They highlight the edges of knowledge, where questions multiply faster than solutions, and where certainty gives way to possibility. Taken together, these stories form more than a collection of mysteries. They reveal a pattern that challenges humanity's most basic assumptions about reality. Across cultures, eras, and backgrounds, individuals have reported experiences that align in structure, detail, and consequence, suggesting that time may not be the rigid, one-directional force it appears to be. Physical evidence, verified details, psychological impact, and scientific anomalies converge to hint at a deeper framework underlying the flow of moments we take for granted. Whether these experiences represent rare natural phenomena, gaps in human perception, or encounters with aspects of time not yet understood, they expose the limits of current knowledge. They remind us that history is not merely behind us, the future not entirely ahead, and the present not as fixed as it feels. Each account acts as a fracture in certainty, urging science, philosophy, and human curiosity to look beyond comfortable explanations. If time can bend, overlap, or momentarily open, then these stories are not violations of reality, but messages from its unseen architecture. They stand as quiet evidence that the universe may be far stranger, more interconnected, and more alive than our clocks can measure, leaving us with one haunting thought that lingers long after the final frame fades to black. What we call now may be only one doorway among many, waiting to be crossed.